Alright, come with me to work on a 2014 Volkswagen Jetta that is having some issues. Our focus today is to change out the spark plugs and the ignition coils so we can see if that will correct the misfires that are currently happening. Let's get straight to it. The process started with my family reaching out and telling me that one of the cars was down. I said I would stop by after work and see if I could help out. I stopped by with a scan tool so I could see what codes the car was showing. Majority of the codes that popped up were cylinder misfires. The cool thing about the tool is that it also shows different solutions that you can try to solve the issue and save some money. I actually recently worked on my girlfriend's car that had the same issue, and after changing her spark plugs and ignition coils, the flashing check engine light went away. I had my family order a pack of spark plugs and ignition coils off of Amazon, and they came in the next day. The first thing I did was make sure I had all the tools I needed. We started by moving some of the parts of the wiring harness out of the way and loosened the bolts at the top of the ignition coils. The first one came out completely with a few pulls. Unfortunately, that was the only one where the ignition coil and the rubber boot at the bottom came out together. For all the other ignition coils, the rubber boot was stuck in the cylinder and gave me a real fight for my money. Now, I personally had never run into this issue before, but I thought I could just keep pulling on the rubber and eventually it would come out. That did not happen, and I ended up wasting a lot of time pulling as hard as I could and getting nowhere. This was slightly discouraging and made me take a step back and rethink my strategy. I needed to find a way to get the rubber boots out of the cylinder so I could get the spark plugs from underneath and change them out. I took a break from getting all the ignition coils out and decided to focus on the one that had come out completely. Since it was off, I was able to get to the top of the spark plug and loosen it. I figured I need a 16mm socket wrench because I tried it on the new one to see which millimeter would actually grip it. I needed a long extension because the spark plugs are pretty deep. I used righty-tighty, lefty-loosey and started turning the wrench. And then after I loosened it, I used a 1/4 inch drive bit handle to grab the spark plug and pull it completely out. Look at that. That right there is a damaged spark plug. That's pretty bad. That's really bad, actually. Here is an example of a bad spark plug. Now it was time to fight the rubber boots again, and I really didn't want to. I went on Google and Reddit, and I found out that if you spray penetrating oil around the rubber and let it sit for a few minutes, it's actually easier to pry it off of the cylinder that it's stuck on. This is actually a common issue, and I didn't even know about it until I looked it up. Also, when you are spraying penetrating oil, don't be afraid to spray extra. It all helps out in the long run. I sprayed it and I waited a couple minutes. So after waiting 10 to 15 minutes and letting the penetrating oil do its job, we pulled out a long flathead screwdriver and started to go around the rubber and try to assist it with coming off. This was still a very tedious process, but as we went in circles, we could hear the rubber slowly coming off the cylinders. This was super exciting and gave us some newfound energy. We were finally making more progress in removing the rubber boots and getting to the old spark plugs. After a few more circles and figure eights with the flathead, we actually got one of the stuck rubber boots out. This was the highlight of the day because earlier we were about to give up. You'll see it in a second. Now that that's out, we can take the spark plug out. For these, it's a 16mm. 16, I don't know if I can see that, 16mm. And I have double extensions, so I don't have the long one. But you gotta get all the way in there. Righty, tighty, lefty, loosey. There we go. Has a magnetic base, so it should be able to grab the spark. 1, 2, 3. Got it. Got it. Second one looks just as bad as the first one. Now that we went through each cylinder and got the rubber boots off, let's compare a new spark plug with the old one that we just took out. As you can see, the new one is shiny and clean, while the old one has buildup and burnt marks at the top. Now we will use our 16mm socket wrench with the extension and tighten the new spark plugs into the same place we took the old ones out of. Don't forget, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. After we tighten one down, we move to the next one and keep doing so until they're all in their right place and they are tight. If you listen to the background noise, you may hear my dogs barking at me as if I'm a stranger making too much noise, which I think is pretty rude. And now we're going to hear the ASMR portion of the video. Listen to that socket wrench turn, all clicky and stuff. Here are the old ignition coils and spark plugs. Here is a close-up of bad spark plugs. Now we are at the home stretch. We have taken out the old ignition coils thanks to penetrating oil. We've taken out the old spark plugs and we put the new ones in. All we have to do now is put the new ignition coils on top of the new spark plugs. They should slide down easily, and in case they don't, your spark plugs may not be tightened all the way. I actually had a few spark plugs that needs to be tightened more, even though I thought they were all the way down, so that the ignition coils could sit flush. If this were the only issue with the car, we would actually be putting the cover back on and starting it up and letting it run to see if the misfire motion is still happening. But for this car, we also need to change out some of the connectors and the wiring before we can start it again. Lastly, of course, like I said, let your car run, put a couple miles on it, do some short trips, and the misfire should stop.